Welcome to the Inclusive Heroes Podcast with your host, Miguel Joey Aviles. Buckle up as we highlight and celebrate leaders who make inclusion happen in their world of work. If you're an HR leader, a DEI practitioner, an ERG champion, recruiter, or ally, this podcast shares the stories of how leaders raise awareness, cultivate courage, and achieve organizational transformation. Join us as we go behind the scenes of true inclusion and belonging. This is the Inclusive Heroes Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Inclusive Heroes. Today, we're talking about the power of representation, and I have an awesome guest who is a diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging leader in a Fortune 500 company, Melody Abedinejad. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for bringing me here today, Miguel. It's such a pleasure.
Absolutely. And Melody, you went viral a few weeks ago, and that's how I came across your LinkedIn profile. I was checking the post, and this morning you were above 60,000 likes, and the comments are still going on fire. So the post was about the movie Encanto. Can you share more about the post and perhaps describe it to our listeners? And as you do that, share with us your diversity story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the post, to my surprise, went viral. I usually, when I post anything to social media, I get about 15 or 20 likes. Did not expect this to go differently. Basically, I was watching, I got a phone call from a friend, one of my best friends, and he said, Melody, I'm watching this movie with my nieces and nephews, and you're in it. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, you're in this movie. I'm going to need you to go ahead and have a look at it. So I got a Disney Plus password from a friend. Truthfully, I didn't even have Disney Plus. And I turned on Encanto, and Mirabelle, she comes right on, and it's so funny, Miguel. I am not someone who gets really emotional typically or cries very easily. It's just not a thing that I normally do. As soon as her little face came on, I burst into tears, flooding down my face. My sinuses hurt afterwards for a few hours. It was wild. All because she just looked and acted so much like me. And it was something that I had never seen before. I really haven't seen myself represented that often. So that's how that came into play. And then I posted about it. So I posted a side-by-side of myself and her, and people loved it. I didn't think anyone would really care that much, but it was pretty fun.
The resemblance is amazing.
It's funny because the green glasses, I think is a big factor. I have the curly hair and eyebrows and everything, but the green glasses really took it over the top for me.
It did. And actually, just because I know that we are, talking about representation, I said, let me see if I can find some green glasses. So for those of you that are listening on your preferred podcast destination, I am wearing some green glasses
Yes.
just to match with Melody and match with Mirabelle and just honor the power of representation. So Melody, tell us more about where you come from. How did you get here? I'm so curious.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think anyone who works in diversity really usually has a backstory about what took them there. It's definitely a field where passion is really important, I think. And you almost can't treat it like a job. It has to include that passion. So for me, I was born in the United States to a family of Iranian immigrants. My parents and sister came here from Iran in the mid-70s. Originally came here to study for my parents, get their graduate and postgraduate degrees anyway. And they came here, and then there was a revolution in Iran, and their families told them to stay. So for better or for worse, they stayed here. And then I was born about 5 years later. And like many, many, many Americans and other folks across the world whose parents and family come from one culture, and then they're born into a culture of a different country in which everyone lives, you have to bridge this gap where you have expectations and a behavioral system that your family has in place, and then that of society at large, wanting certain things from you and expecting you to behave a certain way. And you're kind of caught in the middle. Some people who are really optimistic say it's the best of both worlds. It really can be, but they aren't taking into account that there's a lot of underlying struggle there and identity crises that happen. And you get confused. So I think all of that sort of pointed me in the direction of, and also being a people person, pointed me in the direction of wanting to work with people on issues such as these. And DEI has really been that space, or DEIB, there's all different acronyms for it, but diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging has really been that space where I can fit in these natural skills that I've had to sort of have to get through my day-to-day life and bring it to work.
No, that's, the power of identity and the identity crisis that we experience as historically excluded groups. And Encanto does an amazing job presenting the beautiful Colombian culture. And your post really connected with the audience because the resemblance it's remarkable. Can we talk about the power of representation and what's the impact of not seeing ourselves in major platform like movies?
Oh, for sure. I think definitely people know that representation matters, but then some people who've always been represented very actively in TV and movies don't really know how much it matters because they've never experienced not having it. So I would say for me, it's funny, like when I saw Mirabel, and she looks a lot like me. Okay, it's like way more than anyone else has ever looked like me on TV. One of the first things that happened was sort of a flood of memories from growing up and seeing like 1, 2, or 3 individuals who looked even close to looking like me on TV. And just remembering like how much I was drawn to those characters. And they could be on, one of them was on like a soap opera. Like we're not talking about high quality programming necessarily, but it was just an example of somebody who like had dark hair or had thick eyebrows or had anything that made me feel like, oh, that's sort of me. And fast forward now, I'm turning 40 this year, so I'm like a semi-spring chicken, I suppose. Not exactly, but seriously. But the reality is, at this age, like even now, I never expected. I guess I never even thought about seeing someone who looks like me represented because it had never happened. So it was not something that really occurred to me. And of course, I mean in American media, which is what I'm consuming. Yeah. Worldwide, it's quite possible it's happening, but in American media, it was not happening. And when I saw Mirabel, it was like every little kid bell inside my head just went off at once. And I was like, oh, because it's just like, it really matters. I mean, when you see someone who looks like you in any circumstance where they're elevated, where their voice is being heard, where they're playing a role of importance, where they're worthy of respect, where people are listening to them and looking upon them even as beautiful, which can be a struggle for a lot of people. It really makes you realize that you, in fact, by representation, are worthy of respect, are worthy of elevation, are worthy of being seen, are worthy of being noticed and listened to. And I think that's really the ultimate power of representation, is that it delivers this hope. And people think of hope as something cheesy. And sure, maybe it is, but the reality is like no one can get up and moving for their day without that spark of hope, whatever it is. And I think that representation, and we saw this with like Nathan Chen recently in the Olympics, that he spoke very actively about looking up to Michelle Kwan. And Michelle Kwan, I'm sure, looked up to Kristi Yamaguchi in figure skating because they saw someone who looked like them go before them and realized this was an option and an opportunity for them.
As I listen to your powerful point, I'm thinking about who is the hero in the story. And for those of you that have not seen Encanto, Encanto is a Disney movie, the latest one, and it tells a story of Mirabel Madrigal, who was born in a magical family. And where everyone, here's the key, everyone has these superpowers. But Maribel is the only one that has no power. But to your point, Melody, she is the main character in the movie, and she is the hero. Even when she has no power, we are seeing her using her whole being, her talents, being the center of this story along her family. But I'm thinking about industries here and the workplaces without enough representation. And Melody, this happens across corporate America, and it's kind of the norm, and it has been normalized. What can we do as underrepresented talent? What can you tell our listeners that they can do when nobody else looks like them?
For sure. I mean, so I'll use the example of Mirabel. So Mirabel was in a situation like you described, where her whole family had magical superpowers, and she didn't, at least not on the surface. It didn't seem like she did. We find out later that her power is really in her heart. But the reality is that even in that situation, and you see it right up front in the movie, she's so confident. Like, she has no problem with it. She says, I'm part of the family Madrigal, so therefore I'm special just like them. I'm not concerned about, their powers or their this or their that I don't have. And she really operates with that confidence throughout the entire movie. Now, when we think about ourselves, and I'll get to the context of workplace, but when we think about ourselves, we're not a cartoon character. We don't have confidence that's unflapping necessarily. And so what do we do to kind of help with that? And what do we do in situations like you described, where we're in a work environment, the entire C-suite is white, we're brown, we're beige, we're whatever we are, we're AAPI, and we don't see anybody who looks like us above us. And we think, hey, like, can I get there? Well, what we really want to do is think about all the ways in which in the rest of your life, you're really leading. For example, for me, have I seen an Iranian woman or a Middle Eastern woman in a position of power at any of the companies I've worked at? No. Have I seen a fat person? I'm a fat person. Have I seen a fat woman in a position of power? No. But I think about my own life. I have I've been a long-term volunteer with Dress for Success Boston for a decade, where I'm a leader. In my day-to-day life, I'm a leader to tons of different people who reach out to me with different questions. And what I do really is I seek out those partnerships and those networking opportunities outside of my own workplace to connect with individuals who I feel share the mission with me, no matter what they look like, to seek out any kind of connection, whether it's on LinkedIn or otherwise, and just reaching out to people for virtual coffee chats who maybe are in positions I'm interested in, who look like me, represent me. Inside the workplace, it's joining your employee resource groups. They're very powerful tools. I think a lot of people think employee resource group, like, oh yeah, we celebrate, Black History Month and that's it. It's like, no. You have direct line to leadership. Usually you have an executive sponsor. That person is actively listening to you. You have people in there who are in all different positions. You can network your way up to talk to anyone you want to. So you have to it's work. This is not easy, but you have to seek the opportunity and you have to look for it yourself, because then one day you can be in the leadership and you can be the person who looks like the person who wants to be in your position and really push yourself forward there. We're in that period of time now where this is what we have to do. But we hope that in like 50 years or whatever, that we're going to see people who look just like us in the C-suite, and we're not going to have to play this particular game anymore, right? And that's what we have to do. This is what we've been assigned. We are here in this current time on Earth, and this is our job. Just like women had to push for the vote and all those other people who had to do all their struggles. That's how I look at
No,
it.
no, and I love that because it just takes me back when I was starting my career as well. And, Melody, I remember this instance where I volunteered to become the president of an affinity group, ERG, BRG, depending on who you work. And I am walking towards this meeting with what will be the equivalent of a CEO in a company. And I'm walking in what felt at the time the longest hall in my life because I am walking and all I see in the left corner of the corridor or the hall is all these paintings. I'm talking like this organization had like hundreds of years of history. And Melody, to my surprise, everybody looked the same age, the same ethnicity, the same approach of toughness and masculinity. All of them were men. Let's start there.
And
Let's
all of them
start
were
with that.
white, most likely.
All of them were white. And, the problem with that is that it makes us feel like we don't have a chance. So
Right.
while everybody else is working towards, having amazing performance, we have to deal with what scientists call the minority stress of being underrepresented in a place where we feel we need to work like 10 times harder.
Yeah.
Which takes me back to the movie. There is a scene, a melody between Mirabel and the grandma, Abuela, where Mirabel tells Abuela, I will never be good enough for you, will I? And I see this happening in the workplace. It's like we don't see anybody looking like us. So there is this underlying messaging. We are not good enough. What do you think about that, Melody?
I can't disagree with that. I think we do see that messaging subliminally. I mean, sometimes we hear it actively, which is disgusting. And I think, but at least it's honest, right? When we see it subliminally, which we do all the time, it can create, I mean, I don't have a simple answer. It does create dissonance. It creates that feeling that like I can't get there. I will never be good enough no matter how hard I try. Or like you mentioned earlier, that feeling of having to work so much harder for the same goal. I hate to say it, all that stuff is true, But but I circle back to my example from earlier, which is it's a simple example, but if women hadn't fought for the right to vote, which wasn't that long ago, right? Yeah. And now women vote, no problem. I go vote at my town hall down the street when I need to vote. Mm-hmm. But we take that for granted. So what I'm hoping for is that through the efforts that people like you and I and the listeners make, that in 50 years, someone will take for granted that they can be in the C-suite. And that's it for us. Like we have to fight the fight. Someone has to do it. And it's us.
It is us. It is us. And earlier when you were describing yourself, you use a term, hey, I am fat. And some people may be shocked by that. So, Melody, let's talk about that kind of representation in the workplace. Because, yes, representation is one of the hottest DEI topics right now. In fact, before we talk about retention, before we talk about promotions and salary, we are talking about representation. Often the topic stays there. But one type of representation we don't talk about, and that is what people may refer as body size, overweight, and fatness. And let's go there. And Melody, by the way, I'm very comfortable going there because part of my story is that I was 425 pounds. And I started my career as a person of that size. So are you willing to go there with me today?
Miguel, I was born willing to go there.
Well, let's do this, Melody. Can you tell our people why is it important to remove the stigma of fatness in the workplace?
For sure. I mean, I'll start with just saying that I joke I was born willing to go there, but that is furthest thing from the truth. I've been fat my entire life. really, since probably I was about 6, 7 years old. We're not talking about something that happened in puberty. We're talking about this happened right off the bat. And I'm about 300 pounds, give or take, on any given day. And I've been about 250 pounds since high school. So we're talking about, years and years that I've been around this weight. And actually, when you and I had spoken and you'd mentioned to me that you used to be 425 pounds, I felt so connected, because we go through an experience that a lot of people don't go through, which is really the stigmatization of being fat. And of course, we have stigmas against all kinds of appearances. This includes any kind of disability, physical and visible. So I don't want to, we're definitely not the only ones. But I think when it comes to fatness, first of all, it's a term that you mentioned scares people because they hear fat and they're like, and I always say, like, I joke now, I say, oh yeah, I call myself fat. I didn't say I was a murderer. I just said I'm fat, because I think, people really think that you're like insulting yourself horribly. And it really took me years and years in therapy and other things to realize that I can talk about this. I don't have to be scared of this. I felt like I even came out of the closet as fat. I know that's a goofy analogy, but I remember people making jokes about gaining weight during the holidays or whatever. And I would always sit in the corner like, because here I am with this like huge body. So at any rate, in the workplace, it's tough. I mean, we see, first of all, men being fat societally is more acceptable. It's even sometimes considered like a sign of wealth and power. In most societies, women being fat is unacceptable. Some revere it, very few, but most find it to be not an acceptable appearance or way of being. It's associated with being like lazy, complacent, not attractive, not a hard worker, unintelligent. These are the things we associate with it. In the workplace, those are all bad things. In life, they're bad things, but at work, if someone perceives you because of your appearance as being like lazy and unintelligent, and they perceive a thinner person as being attractive, having self-control, being good at work, being very smart, none of that's related to what you look like, and yet we completely allow that. One of the things I like to talk about, so in my job at UNFI, I recently held a sizeism seminar where we talked about weight bias and height bias, because short men also very much experience height bias at work. And something like 90% of CEOs are over 6 feet tall. I mean, it's completely appalling, the stigmas we have against short men. It was a session that was so well attended, resulted in almost an hour of Q&A and people reaching out to me afterwards saying, no one's ever talked about this. And I'm so happy you brought it up. It's something that I always felt I could never talk about. And I'm here to say, like, talk about it. If you're lucky like me, you say to your company, hey boss, I want to talk about this. Is that cool? And they say, sure. Some places, you might not be as lucky. You might have to do some convincing. But this is one of just, tons of topics that really you could bring up. You can feel free as a DEI professional to push the envelope, be like, hey, what about this? Someone says no, you talk about why they say no. Sometimes no is the answer. Sometimes yes is the answer. So.
Yeah, Melody, and dissecting the nuances of representation is key for any DEI practitioner. So for many of us, maybe like Miguel, that's common sense, but often because we are so rushed in wanting to improve representation, we stayed at the layer of gender, ethnicity, and race, and tend to forget that there are over 30 different diversity descriptions and diversity dimensions. So that's another topic that we will be covering in other episodes on the importance of intersectionality as well. So when we were talking earlier about what we have to face as professionals, for those of us that have a different body size, that are fat, that's another layer that we have to endure. Melody, I forgot, I just remembered this. When I was an intern in Washington, D.C., I was, like I said earlier, in my 20s, early 20s. I remember when I flew from Puerto Rico to Washington, D.C., I couldn't fit in the airplane seat. I literally had to call the CEO. This was a contracting company, so he could authorize a first class ticket. Did I get the next internship? I didn't. Was that the reason? I don't know. And that is the question that it's at the center stage in the lack of promotions, in the lack of movement, in the lack of progress of people that may look like us.
Mm-hmm. No, that story breaks my heart. I mean, I think we don't think about that, but the reality is that you sitting there having to make that call as an intern, right? And someone who may have been paid, may have been not paid very much, and having to call the CEO of a company and say, hey, I don't fit in this seat on my way to my new internship. Can you please assist me? That's something that 99.9% of people will never have to experience. Yes. And it's mortifying because you're embarrassed in the situation. You're embarrassed that this is the first sort of like thing that the CEO is learning about you and seeing about you and hearing. And also we all fear requesting special accommodation. I think we're all afraid to say like, we need what we need to be successful, which comes into play in equity, as we know. And equity is still the hardest piece of diversity and inclusion. Yes. And it's something that we're going to work on forever. But this is a prime example of equity and people not sort of asking you the questions to know upfront before you ever set foot on that airplane, before the ticket was ever booked. Do you have accommodations that you need? And if equity had been in play here, that question would have come up. I myself, I haven't been on a plane in a long time, but I've also gotten bigger during the pandemic. Truly, I have no idea at this point if I would fit in an airplane seat. And I know that if I go there, if I call and book a ticket, and we always do this online anyway, I would probably have to call and say, hey, what does your seat accommodate? Do I need a seatbelt extender? I don't even want to think about this stuff in front of other people.
Yes.
Right. So this is the kind of stuff that now, we were talking about representation, but now interestingly, we're talking a little bit about equity.
Yes. Yes.
And I think the more we make it completely normal in any conversation to ask people, are there accommodations you need in this scenario? What are your pronouns? What's the name you would like to be called by? Once we start making those like completely normal, like, hi, hello, how are you? We're going to be doing so much better. We have a long way to go before we get there. But that's the direction we need to head in.
No, and I want to, as I'm listening to you, Melody, all I want is to celebrate what you just said. It's time to do that. But fortunately, that's why DEI is at the center stage in many companies right now. Can you tell us more about what you do at UNFI and what is your role, and about any exciting initiatives that you may be leading right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So at UNFI, I'm a diversity and inclusion manager. I work on a mighty team of 3. It's myself and my VP. And then there's also a colleague who's a supplier diversity manager. So she really handles a very different aspect of diversity that's extremely important. Between myself and my VP, we handle what I call anything non-supplier diversity. So it's easier to say what I don't do than what I do, Miguel, but I would say I'm not even kidding. But in reality, I head up we call them BIGs, Belonging and Innovation Groups at UNFI, but it's the same thing as an employee resource group in another company. So right now we have 5 of them. We are loading up a 6th. Just started, having employee resource groups about 1.5 years ago. So really getting UNFI up to current speed on some of the diversity practices that weren't in play before. My boss is an inaugural hire. I'm an inaugural hire. Same with supplier diversity was already in place. So it's really just this other piece that's new to the company. So I spend a lot of my time working with the ERGs, updating policies to be more modern, carrying forward like any business initiative related to DEI, like recruitment and retention efforts towards, and I'm just being honest and candid, towards non-white individuals. Because those are really the groups that we're targeting. I don't like the word targeting, but the groups that we're focusing on. to sort of bring on more representation in the workplace. I mentioned earlier, I do training sessions. I'm lucky enough to be able to just propose topics and have people generally say yes. So I did one on inclusive language. We've done sizeism. We're having an upcoming practical allyship session. A lot of people talk about allyship, but do they talk about how to do it? Not often, right? They just say, be an ally. Thank you so much. It's a good idea. So practical allyship, what are the actual actions I can take? In terms of our business initiatives, I think right now one of our big ones is reaching out to our associates who work in our distribution centers. The vast majority of our associates do that. We're a grocery distribution company across the US and Canada. So that's a challenge. These are folks who don't typically even have their cell phones on them in the workplace because it's unsafe. They're around major heavy equipment that's moving very quickly. So, that's our big initiative, is really getting that together and also making sure we're a best place to work for all different kinds of folks. We recently got 100 on the Corporate Equality Index. We're looking to do well on some other indexes as well. So always pressing forward.
Congratulations on that, Melody. And, there are hundreds of other DEI leaders that are also sitting on inaugural roles right now. And this is just one question that I want to throw out there. Do you have any advice, any recommendation, being in that role for almost a year or a little bit over a year, any advice for people that are also sitting on inaugural roles?
Yeah, I think my biggest advice is get to know one another. Reach out to one another the way, Miguel, you reached out to me. Get to know one another on LinkedIn. Don't be shy. Network. Have these coffee chat. I'm always open for a virtual coffee chat. In fact, anyone listening, get me on LinkedIn. I'll say yes to you. I love that because I love getting to know people, but I also know that other people know how to do things differently than I do and have great ideas. So don't be afraid of sharing with each other. These are not trade secrets. We're not here to do well for our company and not do well for the world. Ultimately, our company can do a great job, but if no one else is doing it, it doesn't matter. We need to cooperate with one another. And I think generally it's a very welcoming environment, but encouraging people to keep doing that. And also, don't be scared. I mean, the truth is, our companies don't really know what they need, and we don't always know what we need. So we have to just try things and see what works. And don't be afraid to fail, dive after things. Some things are going to work, some things aren't. Some things are going to go really well. Other things will result in emails of people frustrated. It's all a learning experience.
Melody, thank you so much for that advice, and let's all reach out to each other. I think with creating those relationships, like you said, is what will help us keep moving forward. With that said, to close this episode, I always ask all our guests about their favorite quote. Melody, what is your favorite quote?
Yeah, so I have a favorite quote I've had for a long time. I'm a musician, and my name is actually Melody. People ask that. My parents named me that, coincidence, but I am a musician. I'm a lifelong bass trombone player, singer, play some other instruments. So my favorite quote is about music, no surprise, but it's by Percy Shelley, and the quote is, "Are we not formed as notes of music are, for one another, though dissimilar?" And I think that's really cool. I love it. It ties together so many things for me that are important in my life. And to use a music term, it really resonates.
So we close with that powerful quote. We are music, and we have our guest, Melody, from UNFI. Melody, thank you so much for sharing your story, giving your advice. Listeners, we will include her LinkedIn handle and other background about Melody. And as she said, she welcomes coffee. So please reach out to her, connect. And once again, Melody, thank you for your guidance and insights. And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us to one more episode of the Inclusive Heroes podcast. Until the next time, thank you.